All right, guys, so we're going to try this again. So I just tried to do a live stream earlier, and it was really weird because if you actually go watch the video that I just did a live stream of, it is reporting that it was a 10-minute long video or 11-minute long video on YouTube, but it was actually a 28-minute long live stream that I just did. As you can see by this screenshot, I actually captured it originally when it said that it was 28 minutes, where I'm literally going over this groundbreaking information here about January 6th. Right there. 28 minutes and 47 seconds. Only then for YouTube to actually, I don't know if they live censored the video. In fact, I'm not really sure what happened, but I do think it's very bizarre how the video can just go from a 28-minute video to then a, 10-minute long video? Wait, let's see if I can get this thing to work. Here it is right here. A 10-minute long video. I'll show this to you. Okay, so this is the video I literally just streamed, and it says right here, look, 10 minutes. I'm trying to zoom in more, but it's hard. 10 minutes. So there's a missing 18 minutes from this video. Yet the video looks like, it looks like it was filmed with good quality and good internet connection. But it's kind of weird because, Gavin and other people were watching it and they're saying, it's cutting out, it's stopping, it's buffering. And it was almost like it was cutting out at very strategic times when I mentioned certain names. So hopefully that doesn't happen again through this live stream, but I'm going to have to refilm my show so that this information gets out there. So follow along if you guys weren't part of that stream, or if you were and there were things you missed. Definitely, we're going to try this again, and I'm going to try to get this information to you. Like I said, this is why QUX is a thing, okay? Because I streamed early on QX, and that seemed to be fine. So, I don't know if this is live censorship or what's going on. All right, let's continue on with the show. So I'm going to start with my little intro because I am pre-filming this for Mike Lindell's show. All right. I'm Millie Weaver, and you're watching the Millennial Millie show. So, the Democrats' narrative for January 6th has literally been unraveling, but I'm about to pull the string and pull the thread to further unravel the January 6th narrative that the Democrats have been trying to promote and push, that this was some insurrection prompted by Trump and called for by Trump when he gave his speech, and that this is some kind of a coup or an assault on our government by the MAGA American people, the conservative people, and Donald Trump as their president. That's the narrative that they are trying to push and promote. Well, we're going to talk about the evidence out there, as well as the evidence that I obtained when I had an undercover infiltrate these left-wing affinity groups such as the Sunrise Movement, and essentially gain access to inside these Zoom chats where literal FBI, DHS, CISA, senior executive service level employees within our own government were coordinating and plotting with radical left-wing protesters. You know, those like meth head Antifa types that want to go smash up buildings and smash up cars and go burn down buildings? Yeah, coordinating with those people to essentially subvert the 2020 election and to subvert the government and the will of the American people. So let's walk through this. Now, why on January 6th was there not the National Guard there on the National Mall at the Capitol, when we knew that they were estimating like about 1 million people were going to be coming to D.C., coming onto the National Mall, right around the Capitol, the National Monument, the White House, all right? And this was a very contentious time period politically. You had the country pretty polarized and divided politically, and you obviously had people very concerned about election integrity and about whether their votes were being stolen. So you would think that common sense would allow that they would have, fencing, protest fencing, riot fencing. They would have National Guard there. They would have increased security, right? That's just common sense. the 2017 inauguration had National Guard beefed up security, and it wasn't even contentious, right? Other than some of the rioters that then vandalized nearby areas, but Antifa gets away with that, and that's not an insurrection, right? But with the DNC, the RNC, all these other big conventions where you know it's going to be contentious, they've always put riot fences. They've called in the National Guard. So why was the National Guard not called in on January 6th in the Capitol? Did you know that the National Guard, in fact, was called in by the D.C. mayor for the surrounding area of D.C.? So the D.C. metropolitan area, where the D.C. mayor had jurisdiction for, they had the National Guard. But she didn't have jurisdiction over the Capitol Mall, right? She didn't have jurisdiction over the National Mall. So who had jurisdiction over the National Mall? Well, it is a responsibility of the Sergeant of Arms of the House and the Senate to protect the Capitol building and the National Mall area that came into question, right? And that is Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell, who reside over their Sergeant of Arms. And so Nancy Pelosi Mitch McConnell would have to instruct their Sergeant of Arms, and their Sergeant of Arms would then instruct the Capitol Police to have the National Guard there. The Capitol Police officer actually wanted the National Guard there, and it is on record. He literally wrote affidavits after resigning from his post after January 6th. He said, I wanted the Capitol Police there, and they did not. And so what had happened was, apparently, the Sergeant of Arms of the House and the Senate had met with DHS and the FBI and Secret Service, who told them there was no threat. Why is that a problem? Well, it's a problem for many reasons. Apparently, the D.C. mayor thought that there was threat enough to call in the National Guard. Apparently, other law enforcement agencies believed that there was a threat and were reporting that. So law enforcement at the New York Police Department had sent a packet of material to the U.S. Capitol Police and the FBI. And it was full of what's known as raw intelligence, bits and pieces of information that turned up by scraping various social media sites. And it all indicated that there would likely be violence when lawmakers certified the presidential election on January 6th. All right? So this is what was being reported by the New York Police Department to the Capitol Police and to the FBI. On top of that, you had one law enforcement official actually confirmed to NPR, because this is an NPR article, right? Use their stuff against them, right? That Norfolk FBI officials had found specific threats against members of Congress, an exchange of maps of the tunnel system under the Capitol complex. Where does that sound familiar? And gathering places in Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and South Carolina where extremists were meeting before convoying up to Washington. Why is this key? Now, I don't know for sure if they're actually referencing when they're saying maps and the tunnel system under the Capitol and how these groups had these maps, right? I don't know if they're necessarily referencing what I had sent DHS, Secret Service, DC Metro Police, and our source had sent the FBI pertaining to the Sunrise exposed video chats that we had obtained when we went undercover inside these leftist organizations. But let's talk more about that for those of you guys who don't know about that. Those of you who don't know what we actually uncovered. So if you want to know more about it, first of all, definitely go to sunriseexposed.com where all of this is archived for you to view, download, whatever, for free. Okay, it's all up there as a matter of public record. Video of these leftists literally plotting to take over government buildings. And they had an ArcGIS map of the United States Capitol building where it was literally like redlined that was their target. And this was all right before the 2020 election. And they were calling it a coup, right? They're like, we're going to call it a coup. But they were going to call Trump contesting the election a coup. Weird. Why would you be talking like that before the election and you don't even know the election outcome? Interesting. So the scary part is not only was it just some crazy, like, extremists, literal actual left-wing extremists working together. So, like, the heads, leadership of Sunrise Movement, leadership of Extinction Rebellion, Shut Down DC, Black Lives Matter, all meeting together in the Zoom chats. But you also had, like I said, the government employees. And here, why don't you allow them to introduce themselves to you?
Property or on public property really doesn't affect most of the jobs that you would be considered for. Just as a sideline note.
Yeah, okay. As an attorney, I think we're highly, that's one of the things we have to be careful about.
My name is Laura. I am also a federal contractor rather than a federal employee. I spent 3.5 years as a contractor at DHS HQ.
My name is Maddie Salzman. I'm a management and programs analyst in a federal agency.
Madeline Salzman has been a project manager at the U.S. Department of Energy for more than 5 years.
We're in roles of power. We set and enforce rules. We hold people accountable to social norms.
I have worked in the U.S. government. I worked in the State Department for over 5 years.
Maria J. Steffen worked at the Department of Defense Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations and at NATO headquarters.
And I'm currently now on a leave of absence from my job to focus on our domestic democracy and peace building work. So I'm going to be bringing to bear perspectives both as an academic and as someone who has served as a public servant in U.S. government.
Co-author of Why Civil Resistance Works, part of Columbia University's studies in terrorism and irregular warfare. She was also doing what appears to be military information support operations for Kiev Post, a publication everyone thinks is a CIA newspaper, during the U.S.-backed uprising in Ukraine. She is also a former senior fellow for the Atlantic Council as an expert on Ukraine and the logic of civil resistance.
Rallies, marches, methods.
So, these are some of the people who were coordinating with these radical left-wing groups, people in our own government, high positions of power in our government, okay, with a very set and particular skill set, okay? They had a very particular skill set, and they were coordinating with these left-wing groups about taking over government buildings, about subverting election outcomes in America. That's a bit of a problem. So, of course, having to do the right thing as a journalist, I made sure to get a hold of law enforcement agencies and report this all to them. Check out this tweet where I reminded Director Wray that I did that in which I claimed. Your statements that the FBI has not seen any evidence that members of Antifa, BLM, or other leftist affinity groups were involved in the storming of the U.S. Capitol on January 6th are false. Your agency and DHS had that evidence beforehand, and I can prove it. So here are just a couple of my emails where I am evidencing that I was communicating with DHS, I was communicating with the DC Police and Secret Service about this information, giving them spreadsheets, target lists, and mind you, there were detailed tactical ArcGIS maps that literally redlined out the Capitol building. Here was a document stopping the coup in the nation's capital, which they claimed it was them stopping Trump's coup, right? So here's me talking about how our source had sent over 10 emails to the FBI with documents and videos not scrubbed. Literally, here you go. Here's the Zoom chats. Here are these people working within your own government agency, plotting with these radical left-wing groups to commit violence and take over government buildings. You would think the FBI might be a little concerned about radical groups that literally just did the George Floyd riots and burnt down an entire city, pretty much, that they would be concerned if these same groups are talking about taking over government buildings and working with actual government employees in their plots to do so. You'd think that that would be kind of a high priority, wouldn't you? So, I mean, this is just more evidence here that clearly they were aware that there were some threats. And this wasn't just coming from me, according to that other article. It was coming from other sources as well, that there were security threats and vulnerabilities. So, what gives then, right? And here, that way you don't have to hear it out of my mouth, but you actually hear it out of their mouth. I'm going to show a little clip with you that has been literally pinned to my Twitter page since October 29th, 2020, when I was blowing the whistle on these extremist activities. These organizations are coordinating a inside the Sunrise Movement was able to obtain exclusive video footage inside Zoom chats where Shutdown DC, BLM, and other leftist organizations are coordinating a multi-level coup action exercise utilizing insider help from Democrat Party members as well as federal employees and intelligence contractors.
I'm a management and programs analyst.
I work in the national security community.
I spent 3.5 years as a contractor at DHS HQ.
If you read the mainstream press, like they all have Signal accounts, text them, leak everything you can. The journalists I've dealt with have been super ethical in ways to shield me, to be the source of the leaks.
Groups on the outside being able to show solidarity with federal workers.
Making sure that we're naming what is happening as a coup.
Totally agreed in the shutdown DC conversations that I've been having, and that's not on the federal side. We also are often saying, like, call it a coup.
They plan to shut down Washington, D.C. and other major U.S. cities starting November 4th until Inauguration Day.
Do we have any plans for how to respond if there's a coup?
Come to BLM Plaza anytime after 4 p.m. on election night. On the 5th, we're going to shut down the White House.
Map the White House and know every access point so we knew we could blockade it.
On the 6th, we're going to shut down larger parts of Washington, D.C.
We've been working on a target map and a framework.
He said on the 6th.
For scenario. So where all the...
Okay, so check that out. Look at that. What is that outlining? Any of you familiar with the map of Washington, D.C.? That was their red line, their target was the Capitol building, okay? That is what is redlined right here on this ArcGIS map, the Capitol building.
Police stations. Where are all the key government buildings? Who are the Trump boosters?
Members of Congress that are coming in, we're going to meet them at the airports or at Union Station and send them back to where they came from until we deal with the situation that we're in.
We are going to be in a crisis, but we want it to be one that we are creating. Whoever's got the guns can win. Let's take over the buildings. If there are people that are...
You see that? Number 1, what does it say at the very top here? Number 1, take over important government buildings. There you go. I mean, come on, guys.
Willing to do that, we should support them. Get ready to shut your city down on the 4th or the 5th.
Regardless of who wins, the left plans to take over. So that is a video that's literally been up, like I said, for 2 years now, pretty much. And what has come of any of this, right? I mean, I was literally warning these agencies that this was going to happen, but see, there's a problem when come to find out some of the people working in their very agencies were actually conspiring and committing the very act that I was warning. So I was essentially telling on them to themselves in a way. And that is the scary part. You don't believe me? Well, whatever happened to Laura Robb? Was she fired for her subversive activities in these radical left-wing groups? No, in fact, she was immediately recontracted and hired. Here's a document, actually, which shows that she's still currently, here you go, Laura Robb, she's still an analyst working for none other than, drumroll please, this is a long document, none other than Department of Homeland Security, right here. Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, Interagency Security Committee. So she's still literally working with the same agencies which literally oversee the election. They oversee if there was ever a terrorist event or attack on a building, right? These government facilities, they literally oversee government facility security, election security, all of these things, all right? And they still have these people working within these agencies. They did nothing to get rid of the problem or get rid of people for acting improperly. Kind of a problem. If you don't know a little bit about the history of CISA and who created it, well, that was your very own Obama, Barack Hussein Obama, in 2017 in January, right before he had to leave the White House and hand over the keys to the kingdom to Trump. He established CISA, which is the Cyber Infrastructure Security Agency, which would work with Homeland Security, it would work with the Sector Coordinating Council, the Government Coordinating Council, and it would work with the, I believe, the SSP as well, which is Joint Election Infrastructure Subsector Specific Plan. So, I mean, they essentially wanted to make sure that there was no possibility for foreign election interference in the next presidential election. That was what they had claimed the reasoning was for. But clearly you can see the people who filled the positions at CISA, well, just from the little taste we got from Laura Robb, you can kind of get a gist of the mentality and political boldness that they have, and that they're so willing to use their official government capacity to recruit people to their radical communists after work extracurricular activities, let's just say. So here's another interesting thing in this very document where they talk about countering election mis, dis, and malinformation. So this is MDM, the mis, dis, and mal for information. And so as part of CISA and election security, they wanted to work essentially with the FBI and these other agencies to censor you on social media and censor what they thought was misinformation or disinformation or malinformation. If it could even be so closely, ever so minutely pointed to in the direction of an election, they could then use and abuse their powers to censor you and shut you down. And that's exactly what they did. So here's an article that references just that. FBI officials who briefed Facebook on Hunter Biden's story are Democrat donors. So this is a nice little story that just recently came out pertaining to the Hunter Biden story, where two FBI officials who had briefed Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg on the Hunter Biden laptop story, apparently they were both Democrat donors. Oh, I'm so shocked and surprised, right? Another interesting fact was many of the people actually in the Sunrise Zoom chats that I just showed you, many of them are like spouses of FBI agents and whatnot. I mean, this is what we've been finding when we've been running the names and the backgrounds of some of these people. But what we find here is these FBI officials, Laura Demlow, I don't even know how to say it, Demlow, and Elvis Chan, both working at the FBI, were the ones who briefed Mark Zuckerberg and essentially gave him what he needed to about the Hunter Biden laptop story. And this is what he had done. They had done essentially to make it so Facebook would censor people on social media. And they did this because the FBI had earlier warned the company to be on high alert for Russian efforts to release derogatory information about the Bidens before the election. So they claimed that this was some kind of a foreign influence operation to expose Hunter Biden, and that this was a foreign thing, and therefore they could use the power of CISA, the power of the FBI to come down on Facebook, which I'm sure it wasn't very hard. It was probably just like, oh, Facebook, you know, Facebook's like, gladly I will censor my political opponents on my platform, right? And therefore, this is what you have. You have our own officials are now questioning why the justice system was used and abused, essentially. Our agencies, our government agencies were used to try to censor the speech of Americans on social media right before the election to essentially cover for the Biden administration. It's entirely improper, but this is what they do, right? This is exactly what they do. And there's actually like a lawsuit and everything going. The Attorney General's office is suing the Biden administration for allegedly colluding with social media companies to censor free speech, all right around the time of an election. So there is that for you. Okay, this is how bad the problem is right now. Clearly, we have a serious issue on our hand when we have FBI officials who are Democrat donors who are using and abusing their positions inside government to try to help out the people who they support politically and try to take down those who they politically oppose. And is it any wonder that we're seeing Donald Trump's home being raided at Mar-a-Lago? Okay, is it any wonder that we're seeing these abuses within the FBI, right? We're seeing them weaponize the FBI against homeschool parents, or weaponize them against Amish people, weaponize them against moms and dads who are concerned about what their children are being taught or indoctrinated with in the public school system. So just because they show up to a school board meeting, they're now being looked at as terrorists by the FBI. There's a serious problem here, right? But let's get back to January 6th, okay? Their narrative is that Trump did January 6th. They even think it was pre-planned or premeditated by Trump and his people. The problem is that we literally have these left-wing groups and government employees and the FBI's hands all over this thing. Not to mention, the FBI won't ever tell us more about Ray Epps, right? What was Ray Epps' role? The FBI doesn't want to confirm how many FBI agents and informants were actually used and deployed in the field on January 6th at the Capitol. There's a serious problem with the FBI doing their COINTELPRO operations targeting right-wing groups. Just look at what has happened in the past with the Oath Keepers and the Gretchen Wheeler case, where there was this attempted plot to kidnap Gretchen Wheeler, but most of the people all orchestrating and plotting the plot were FBI agents or FBI informants, right? And then they want to get the few little people that just were kind of going along with it and nail them and say this was a big right-wing extremist plot, right? I mean, there's a problem clearly going on here within our own government agencies. And I, for one, want to see something happen in regards to what's exposed in these Zoom video chats. You are not allowed to, by law, you are not allowed to use your government position to engage in activism. You are not allowed to do that. Okay? So how on earth are these people able to do that? You're also not allowed to try to subvert the election. And I mean, these people literally talk about subverting. Okay? So why is nothing being done? Why is nobody talking about this? And then you have Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell, right? The Democrats and the Rhinos, who both had the opportunity to instruct their sergeant of arms to have the National Guard there. But they didn't. They left it wide open. Ripe for the taking, ripe for the picking. I've never seen such a thing in all my years of journalism where I've gone out to cover protests and big events. I was there at the RNC. They give like $1 billion practically to Cleveland to beef up security before the RNC. They had riot fences everywhere surrounding the event just because they knew protests were going to happen. Okay? The DNC, they had riot fences everywhere. People were even scaling and jumping over those fences because they believed that the election was stolen from Bernie Sanders and given to Hillary Clinton in the Democrat primary. But see, none of that was successful. You didn't see people storming the DNC. Why? Because the minute they would scale the fence, they were arrested. They had police. They had National Guard. They had massive fences everywhere. They had fences during the inauguration of President Trump in 2017. What stands out here that is very concerning is why did they intentionally not have security? Okay? And so their claim is that it was because of optics. That's what we've heard Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats. Oh, it was optics. We didn't want to make it seem like they didn't, protesters wouldn't have the right to protest or have their free speech. Yeah, right. Since when did they care about that? The National Guard was even deployed for various BLM protests. Even the George Floyd protests, the National Guard was deployed. So it's bizarre to me that they cared so much about optics suddenly. Really? I think they cared about the optics of what was going to come out in the hearing when all of that evidence was put forward and all those witnesses gave their statements. That's what I think they were worried about as far as optics go. So anything they could do to shut it down. And that's what they had to do. They had to shut it all down, completely flip the narrative as fast as they could. And that's exactly what they did. Even some of the Democrat media or left-wing media outlets can't help but point out what's with the lack of security. What's with them leaving the building vulnerable? Yeah, it is an interesting thing, isn't it? And that's why, after all the evidence I've seen, there's no other way to call it out than to say literally January 6th was an inside job. Okay? When you have government employees inside our own government covering for it, not pushing reports through of threats and vulnerabilities, actually engaging in part of these radical groups who, mind you, we've got the documented evidence of there being Antifa cells there. People dressed in black bloc where all their body markings and faces are disguised with black clothing, right? So we have that there. We know that there's the FBI infiltration inside many of these right-wing groups, that their people were on the front lines. It needs to be investigated. And that's the whole point of this video here today, is I'm calling for an investigation. I'm calling for them to actually do their job and look into the information that I've sent them. Well, I hope today's show has been informative for you all. I'm Millie Weaver, signing